Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me tonight for another edition of 360 Live Chat. And before we go any further, I would like to thank Cassandra Williams for making her chat channel available to us. And Cassandra is the brains behind Educational Innovation 360 Degrees, which focuses on improving reading performance of students. I'm David Johnson, and our guest this evening is Mecca Salahuddin, PhD. She serves as the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Performance Excellence for the Alamo Colleges District. Dr. Salahuddin provides strategic thought leadership to guide planning and continuous improvement efforts with a focus on strategic thinking and a keen eye for connecting ideas, processes, and systems. She helps tell the story of student success and performance excellence. She is passionate about creating spaces and places where others can develop and grow to reach their goals and objectives. Mecca, good evening, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, David. How are you?
I'm
It's
good too.
thundering outside, so if you hear some noises, that's what it is.
Oh, okay. Well, when you said if you hear some noise, I thought you were going to say if you hear any noise, it's just
It's
noise.
just me.
It's not. I thought that's where you're going to
Yes. No, I would have went there in my other life, but this life.
go. Well, it's a pleasure having you here today. Tell us about your background. How did you get here?
So yeah, not too much, right? I'm from originally from San Antonio, Texas,
Uh-huh.
born and raised on the east side of San Antonio, Texas. Did all my formal education here in San Antonio, both at the University of Texas at San Antonio and at the University of Incarnate Word
Hmm.
with my doctoral degree.
Hmm.
I'm passionate about psychology, thinking, planning, and all those things that kind of coalesce together to bring us to where we are today in this conversation. I've been in higher ed for over 20 years, working at both four-year institutions and the community college where I am now. And I've also had the opportunity, most recently, to worked out of state, Washington State. And so to get a different perspective of higher education, although with the globalization of higher ed these days, it all works it together. We're all partners and competitors in this search to provide better opportunities for students in higher education.
So, in your bachelor's and master's degrees, did you study psychology?
I did. So my bachelor's degree is in psychology and my master's degree is in experimental psychology. So
Experimental psychology. Wow, I
yes.
didn't realize that.
So
Hmm.
that took me down a career path, probably different than I started with. I wanted to be a child psychologist, and so in some ways, still interested in that type of work, and again with students. They're
Hmm.
not children by far, but definitely understanding and the human being and human behavior is important. I think it's important in this planning work as well.
And in your doctoral program, you studied organizational theory, right?
Yes, so
Hmm.
at the University of Incarnate Word, my dissertation was on generational differences in the workplace among communication
Hmm.
and how that impacts communication and the work that individuals do together in the workplace.
Hmm. At one time, they called that industrial psychology.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so what do you call it now? Organizational theory? Is that what we call it now?
Organizational learning, organizational psychology, yeah, all those things. And I think there's still industrial organizational psychology PhD program in some institutions. Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I studied at the time it was called organizational theory, and all of the books that I have are filled up with, I would say, industrial psychology concepts.
Right.
Hmm. Interesting,
Absolutely.
interesting. Well, our topic tonight it's the thinking for me. Three P's of planning, and we have four topics there. The three P's of planning: pause for the cause, spaces and places of planning, challenges and opportunities. If I may say first, I have a whole different set of three P's, but I won't go into that here. So let's go into your three P's of planning, Mecca. Let's hear what they are.
Yeah, so my three P's of planning are preparation, prioritization, and being able to pivot. And it's really just some, to me it sounds very basic, but I think if you don't prepare to plan, then you're not going to do really good planning. And preparing to plan is really about identifying who needs to be in the room when the planning is happening, who needs to benefit from the planning, when does the planning need to occur in the organization, and what would be covered, what would be the deliverables. And so having a clear understanding of that information helps you to planning different types of planning events throughout the year, with that preparation. And then prioritization is
Well, let me
just
stop
things.
at preparing to plan for a moment. Uh,
Yes,
of course, you've heard the expression to fail to plan is to plan to fail. Could you expound upon that and how you have seen that and how you have addressed it in your work?
absolutely. I think planning to do anything, whether it's in the workplace with strategic planning or in your personal life with planning, if you don't have a plan, if you don't know where you are and where you're trying to go and plan to get there, you may end up anywhere. I like to use the example of taking a trip. For people. You plan that trip and you plan it out carefully. You know, if it's a road trip, it's going to take days. You may decide where you're going to stop and get rest, where you're going to stop and get food, if you're going to stop and see someone. So, and if you don't do that, there could be disasters along the way, right? So it's definitely important that you plan if you're really intentional about where you're trying to go. But
Hmm.
the planning itself is not the end game.
Hmm. Now, Mecca, you spoke earlier. You mentioned knowing who should be in the room. Well, how does one determine who should be in the room?
Yeah, those are your key stakeholders and your partners in the work. It's the individuals who are going to give you the information to help you decide on the goals and objectives of the plan. And then it's going to be the beneficiaries of that plan because you want their voice as well. You want to plan something that's going to benefit everyone involved, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, if I go back to taking a trip, if you have kids, you want to hear from the kids. You know, what do you all want to do on this trip, right? You want to make it a enjoyable trip for everyone. You want to make sure that it includes some activities and events that they will enjoy and have
So,
their voices in the room.
would the participants be representative? And what I mean by that is, should it be proportional to the people who would be affected by the final plan and the implementation of the plan?
I think in this day and age and where we are in planning and higher education around diversity and equity and inclusion,
Mhm.
absolutely, you should have that representation in the room. You want
Okay.
to make sure that the voices in the room represent the voices that, again, are going to be impacted the most from the work after it's done and completed.
Okay. Now, when it comes to prioritizing planning, what do you mean by that?
You have to do it. You have to prioritize it. You have to make it done. One of the things that at the Alamo Colleges District, we have an annual strategic planning retreat. And
Hmm.
last year, we were actually the week that the pandemic reached this inflection point. It was the worst, and we went to remote working. That week, we were supposed to have our annual planning. And at that moment, I realized we still have to plan. If nothing else, in this time, we still have to plan. So we were still prioritizing the planning, but then we had to pivot, which is the next one in terms of how we did that planning because of the new situation that we were currently in with the pandemic. But the planning never stops.
Now, when regarding prioritizing planning, do you use a planning tool? For example, I call it Microsoft Project and not Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project because it allows you to project how long it will take you to reach the end of your plan or the activities that you're trying to accomplish. So, do you use some sort of tool?
At our highest level of planning, where we're visioning, what we call our visioning planning, where our conversations with a large body of constituents happen in our retreats, we don't use a tool. We use different approaches during out the day of those retreats, but we don't use any technology or tool.
Okay.
Then we get into our departmental and unit planning and being able to archive that work among our colleagues. We do use a tool. It's a strategic planning online tool. There are many, many ways in which to capture the good work that your organization is doing around planning.
hmm Now, because I wrote my dissertation on strategic planning, I could ask this question. Do you plan what you want to do or what you must do?
Well, that's a good question, right? Because what a lot of times we plan what we want to do, and when I talk about the spaces and places of planning over there and becoming who you were meant to be, that's what I talk about planning for not what you want to do, but what you need to do. And again, just looking into our current environment around higher education and what has historically been the ways in which higher education has served our community, and in the ways that the higher education needs to serve our communities moving forward, it has to look different. Planning has to look to what it is that we need to be doing versus what we want to be doing.
hmm Now, when I read Pivot, the planning, I see contingency plan. Is that what you meant by pivot?
What I mean by that is that you do not plan just because it's not going the way that you anticipated, but
hmm
you pivot because something in the environment, again, for instance, a pandemic,
hmm
requires you to pivot and do something differently, but you don't do anything at all just because there has been a stop or a barrier in terms of the way you were currently doing.
Okay. So would you call that a plan B?
I call it being agile. Again, what I talk about here is being structured and having agility, right? You
uh-huh.
can only, because this is the planning part, it's not the plan, right?
Yeah.
So a part B or contingency is about the actual planning, the actual resulting document. This is about the planning itself and being able to rethink how you want to go about doing that planning, knowing that it still needs to happen.
Mecca, you just quoted Eisenhower, whether you know it. You said it's not the plan, it's the planning. Well, that's Eisenhower.
Absolutely.
Great, great. All right. All right, let's hop into the next topic there. Pause for the cause.
Absolutely. So, sometimes we get about the business of doing, and often we don't stop to just be in the moment and think about why we're doing what we're doing, what's really resonating with us at this moment, what are something that we need to rethink, right? Because sometimes, as you just mentioned earlier, we know what we want to do, but maybe that what we want to do is not what we need to do right now. And so we
Mm,
need to rethink of how we're doing something in order to do it the way it needs to be done now.
mm,
An example of that for us, where planning was so important, is we already had started planning and thinking about how we serve our communities around poverty and
mhm,
the like within San Antonio. And so the Alamo colleges have advocacy centers that they had established at two of our colleges, and we're now piloting and standing up um, advocacy centers at the other three colleges that
mhm,
really service the students with food pantries, clothes closets, mental health services, and the like. Well, when we went remote work from home and work remote learning for the students, they were not coming on campus where those facilities lived in brick and mortar, but more so than ever, the students in the community needed those services. So we had to rethink how we would provide those services to those students at the time. And so now we have what we call pop-up food markets for
Mhm.
students, where we're still partnering partnering with the San Antonio Food Bank to
Mhm.
provide these services to students,
Well,
but we're
Mecca,
taking it to the community.
I would call that a pivot. You
It's
had
a
one thing
pivot.
in mind. You had one thing in mind, and you revisited your plan, and you saw that it needed to change in order to best serve your students, your clientele, if I may use that term. So you
Yeah,
had to pivot in order to best serve the students.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So pivot, rethinking it, pivot the
Right.
plan, pivot the
Right.
planning, it
Uh-huh.
all results in the impact, right? So
Mhm.
I talked there, towards the end here on the agenda about intent versus impact.
Mhm.
Ultimately, we're trying to impact something with our planning. And
Right.
although our intent at the beginning of the planning could be one thing, the impact may be another.
Uh-huh. Now I might have missed something. What do you mean by resonate?
Resonate, I think sometimes that we sometimes in the planning, because the planning is about visioning and actions and gaps and challenges, that we sometimes forget about the strengths and what really resonates with us in terms of our why and our purpose and the things that we have accomplished. And so again, pausing to really think about those things are just as important as the gaps and the opportunities that we
Mhm.
identify as well, because we
And
can
resist.
leverage our strengths with that.
Okay. And resist. What do you mean by that?
Sometimes there's a resistance there, but we need to know why. And so sometimes we resist something with different information, but we have to really consider, why do we resist that? What is the information that's there for us to really think about our resistance? Are we resisting for resisting sake? Are we resisting because of our own internal biases and
Well,
understanding for something? But with that resisting, or is it preventing us getting to where we need to be versus where we want to be?
so
Going
are you
back
talking
to
about
our
resistance
previous
to
comments.
change? Are you talking about
Yeah,
resistance to change? So
yes.
would that be among college staff or students, staff, and, about who would be resisting in this case?
It could be anyone, right? Because sometimes we can resist something because we think we know what's best, and we know and we think that what we're doing is the best thing for our 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 community, both employees and students in this case. But sometimes in that resistance, we miss that opportunity. So
Hmm.
in order to pause and to allow us to think about the resistance and why we're resistance, and ask the questions to ourselves and to others about their resistance, it can bring up new thinking and new ways of being, in this case as we're planning the work.
Okay. All right. I understand. All right. So we have two other major topics to discuss. Which one would you like to try first?
Where do you want to go? One of the things we talk about, the best of planners, right? We're and you're a strategic planner, so you probably understand this best. That there's this notion around, that's what they do. Those strategic planners, that's what they do. That's not me. I'm not a planner. And we're all planners, right? And we all can be the best of planners when we understand the why of planning, and that it's essential to the work. And it's not the job of just one person, but it's really the work and the need of all to participate.
Hmm. Yeah, there's another adage about the worst plans are the ones created by one person sitting in a room by him or herself. You know, and so that goes back to who else should be in the room when you're making a plan. Aligning across time and space. What do you mean by that?
Well, I know for our organization specifically, we do planning in multiple levels. So we do planning at the organizational level, that high level planning that most people are familiar with. You have a retreat, you come up with your mission, vision, and values, and some high level goals and objectives that you then create a strategic plan to. But there are other spaces in time where planning needs to happen, but you want to make sure that all those activities, the planning is aligning towards the bigger vision and the bigger goal. Uh,
Hmm.
and they're each as important as the other level, right? No one is you can have a big vision, but if you don't have um, departmental or other levels of planning to align to that big vision, then that vision doesn't become realized.
Interesting. And you just prompted me to go in a somewhat different direction. So please bear with me. So you know that I've spent many years in the Air Force,
Yes.
and of course we are in the last 20 years we've been in two major wars, and believe it or not, there was a lot of planning involved in those in the execution of those wars. And my question for you regarding aligning across time and space is, how do you align it at the various organizational levels? I know how the Air Force does it. How do you do it? How do you align things at the various organizational levels within Alamo College's district?
Well, it does. It starts with our major conversations for the future, where we just bring people in and have conversations around their thinking of what should matter, where we should be going, how we should get there, and then taking that information into a retreat where it's much more structured in terms of the approaches and the questions that we're asking people to think about to come up with those high level goals and objectives. And then that is deployed out to the rest of the organization to use in their departmental planning and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. But it's that high level goals and objectives are not there for others to see, where do I sit in this work, right? We're all there and we all have a part to play in assuring that the plan is realized, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding where we sit and how we can contribute to that, I think is very important. And
Mm-hmm.
that happens throughout a year. So it's not this one event that happens and then we create the plan, and the adage that they say that we put the plan on a shelf, but this really is a living working document that
Right.
really guides our work.
Yeah, I have indeed worked in organizations where I found strategic plans in the basement in storage, collecting dust, or on a
Yeah,
shelf collecting dust. So yes, yes, um, a plan should be a living document to which you refer, and you could use as a basis for pivoting when necessary.
absolutely.
Okay. All right, let's talk about challenges and opportunities. How do they fit into planning?
Yeah, so I have a few here that I had just listed here. The notion around structure versus agility. The structure, you may have the structure of the planning process that you enact or you implement, but you still have the agility to do something differently. Again, in our instance, we had a strategic planning retreat where we brought 200 plus individuals into a room and had discussions with them about where Alamo colleges could go next with their work. And here I am planning a retreat in March of 2020 when it comes out that says, hey, you can't have more than 10 people in a room.
Oh, yeah, because of the pandemic. Yeah, all right.
Right, right. So now you have to really think about what that looks like on the actual planning process side. And so we did our planning retreat via Zoom, and instead of one day, we had it over 2 or 3 months, and we broke things up in a chunk, and it was actually a different way of doing things, but it actually gave us some ideas and some thinking around. It caused us to rethink how we were doing planning to begin with, and that
Mhm.
actually was a better way to be doing this, to utilize technology to actually reach out to more individuals and get more people involved in the process.
Mhm.
And
Well,
so being able to be agility in that way.
mhm. What's the value of having a retreat?
Well, bringing people again in a room, I wouldn't say locking them in a room, but definitely getting them in a room and focusing on that one effort, right? I think is very important to say. Today, this is what we're going to pause for the cause,
Mhm.
right? And really start thinking about where we want to be moving forward. So that retreat, that one day is very important in terms of we're all busy. We're
Mhm.
all busy, but if we can stop for that one day or multiple days, as we did in the fall, to really focus our attention on the work
Now,
ahead, I think is important.
now, do you actually go somewhere?
We did. So here in San Antonio, again, we were at Incarnate Word in their Sky Room,
Mhm.
beautiful facility overlooking the zoo.
Mhm.
Prior to the pandemic,
Mhm.
we did our retreat out at the stables at the Pearl, which
Mhm.
beautiful facility as well. And so again, absolutely want people to be comfortable and again focus. When you take them off from their office, then they're not probably thinking about office work. They're thinking about the work that you're trying to do within the retreat. So it's important. I think that is a great aspect. But again, we learned that we can create some of those same environments without being in a physical space.
Mhm. Could you speak briefly about speed versus precision? What's that expression? If you want to move fast, move alone. If you want, speak a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, the one I was thinking about with this was, you go fast to go slow, and or the inverse of that is you go slow to go fast.
Hmm.
Um, so speed is going fast, um, and then precision is going slow to go fast. I would also contend. I've been listening to and reading about the notion around flow, and the concept. I can't think of the gentleman's name now, who's invented it, the concept, and it's out there though around flow. And flow is really about high skill and high challenge. And when you're in flow, you both are skilled around something, and you're challenged by it as well. And so
Hmm.
I think having a balance of the two. I'm a balanced person, right? I'm not an either or person, although have this up here as verses. It's
Hmm.
really about both and. So how can you both have speed but precision? And I think again that precision piece comes in the pause for the cause. The speed
Hmm.
comes into the planning. So if
Well,
you have
Michael,
good planning, you can be able to do the speed and go fast on an idea.
Michael, we have about 30 seconds left. What's the quick takeaway that you would want people to have?
I would say go with the flow with the planning. Like don't get too involved. There's structure in planning that you can learn about, but there's power in the thinking, and there's power in just kind of going with the flow and being. Um, there's an author who talks about be like water. So
Mhm.
I see like sometimes you have a structure like rocks, but if you can be like water, water can go around rocks at any time. So
So then,
that's
what's the call to action?
call to action. I say lean into planning.
Lean
If
into
you're
it.
an organization, know that your voice in the planning process is very valuable. It can really help the organization move where it's meant to be.
And if people want to know more and contact you, how shall they do so?
My information is down below. My Twitter handle is down below, although I'm not a huge Twitter follower.
Hmm.
I am there. And then, of course, my LinkedIn link is down below as well.
Well, Mecca Salahuddin, PhD, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Performance Excellence for the Alamo Colleges District in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you for being here. I'm David Johnson of Transform Ed Consulting. And again, I'd like to thank our dear friend, Cassandra Williams of Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. And to our friends, thank you for being with us here tonight and have an excellent evening.
Thank you, David, for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.